welcome to Adventures in Theater History, where we bring you the best stories from the deep and fascinating history of theater in the city of Philadelphia. I'm Peter Schmetz. Because it's a rather overwhelmingly busy time for me right now, I am pausing the podcast's investigation into the history of modern Philadelphia nonprofit companies to bring you something from a little deeper in the city's past, although, as we shall see, this story also has ominous resonances to events of the present day. And because we are releasing this episode in late February, early March of 2026, when it is once again Oscar season, for this episode and the next episode, I'm going to bring you some tales of Hollywood. Both of these stories originally appeared as a bonus episode on Patreon, where my work is supported by a small group of generous patrons there. So here's my pitch. These wonderful people are carrying much too much of a burden all by themselves. Please consider joining their ranks, won't you? And in return for your support, just a small monthly donation, you can hear all this podcast bonus episodes and early releases there too. There's an easy link to find it in the show notes, or you can find us by searching for Adventures in Theater History on the Patreon website. Okay, like many other small independent podcasters that you may listen to, I happily give most of my work away for free in order to, spread a little light and truth and have fun doing it. And as many of you also know, I make it my habit to research and share a daily post on the podcast Facebook page about Philadelphia theater history. About 2 years ago, I came across something in my files that I had once put aside for later. I'd saved it under the date, December 30th. The Lynn Riggs play, Green Grow the Lilacs, performed for the first time at the Garrick Theater on December 30th, 1930, in a production by the Theater Guild. Now, I knew that's the play that Rodgers and Hammerstein's musical Oklahoma was later based upon. Well, fantastic, I thought. December 30th, here we go. Let's do a little extra research about this online and then type that baby up. But when I started to dig, I realized that I'd made a mistake earlier. The opening night was the 29th of December, not the 30th. Shoot, so we've already missed the day. And the production had already played 2 weeks in Boston. So this Philly production wasn't the world premiere. This wasn't the story that I've been looking forward to writing. Now, the review in the Inquirer I found, that was dated the 30th. Sure, maybe that would work. So I read a bit deeper into that review, which was very positive on the whole. The play, Green Grow the Lilacs, was set up amongst the cowboys and farmers of Oklahoma Territory with lots of folk songs and authentic Okie dialogue. Franchot Tone had his first starring role in this production. He played Curly, the cowboy, and an actress named June Walker was his lady love, Laurie. At the final curtain, the company was called out time and again, the critic J. Morgan Cook wrote. And then, Cook continued, in the production of this homely little gem that harks back to other days, the Guild has shown its usual finesse in staging, directing, and casting. The scenes designed by Raymond Sovey are simple, sometimes almost pauperish, but undoubtedly authentic and most effective. Herbert J. Biberman, who now has Vogue, directed the play and made a thoroughly good job of it. Okay, I thought nice enough, but there's nothing there really to make a story out of. So I idly clicked on one more story that newspapers.com had brought up in my search, a teaser article from about a week earlier, also in the Inquirer, which mentioned, just in passing, that Herbert J. Biberman, the director, was, of course, Herbert J. Biberman of Philadelphia. Wait, who was Herbert J. Biberman of Philadelphia? And why was that name just slightly familiar to me somehow? Something more maybe could be there, so a quick trip to Wikipedia told me that, well, there certainly was a lot more. Herbert J. Biberman had been one of the famous Hollywood 10, the group of left-wing screenwriters and directors like Ring Lardner Jr. and Dalton Trumbo, who'd been hauled up in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee in the late 1940s and then blackballed from working in the movies throughout the 1950s and sometimes for the rest of their lives. We've talked on the podcast in our episode about Paul Robeson and in our book, in the chapter about Philip Loeb, how all this went down. And it went beyond just Hollywood, as Herbert Biberman himself laid out the broader consequences in a short film put together by him and the other members of the Hollywood 10 group to defend themselves.
Loyally oaths and loyally bored. Thought control entering the university campuses. Educators being fired. Film studios enlisting in the Cold War. Labor leaders being framed on perjured testimony. Lawyers sent to prison for defending their clients. The reputation, career, and liberty of any citizen at the mercy of the professional stool pigeon.
So the Hollywood 10 became one of the famous political and moral parables of modern times about who named names, who snitched, and who didn't, who took the moral stand, and who sold their friends out. Both the Arthur Miller play The Crucible and the Gary Cooper movie High Noon, which was written by Carl Foreman, yet another one of these blacklisted screenwriters, had attempted to dramatize the conundrum. Biberman was right in the thick of it. There was a year 2000 movie called One of the Hollywood 10, in which Herbert Biberman was played by no one less than Jeff Goldblum. A great bit of casting, I must say. They looked quite alike. Ghada Scacchi had played his wife, the glamorous actress Gail Sondergaard, but I'd never seen that movie. It was just a little indie film, I found out, and it hadn't been well reviewed at the time. It was a joint production with a Spanish company who released it as Punto de Mira, or Point of View. But no outtake or documentary that I've been able to find is quite as stirring as this recording of Herbert J. Biberman's testimony before HUAC. It's just about a minute long, but it was enough for him to get convicted of contempt of Congress and get sent to jail for it.
Mr. Biberman, are you a member of the Screenwriters Guild? Have you ever been a member of the Screenwriters Guild?
Now, Mr. Stribling, I would like to reply to this very quietly. Mr. Chairman also. If I will not be interrupted, I will attempt to give you a full answer to this question. It has become very clear to me that the real purpose of this investigation...
That is not... Are you a member of the Communist Party? Have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? Are you a member of the Communist Party? Are you now? Have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
It is perfectly clear to me, gentlemen, that if you continue in this particular...
Mr. Chairman, will you direct the witness to answer that question?
And that is because strife in the industry,
You're excused.
chaos in the industry...
Will you direct the witness to answer that question, Mr. Chairman, before he leaves his stand?
I have not refused to answer the question. I told you before I will answer this question
Now, Mr.
fully.
Biberman,
Your purpose is to use this to disrupt the motion picture industry,
Now,
to
Mr.
invade
Biberman,
the right not only of me, but of the producers to their thoughts, to their opinions. And this I will not permit.
All right, more to the point and more to our purposes, neither YouTube, nor Wikipedia, nor the movies, nor any other document I could find seemed to care that Biberman was originally from Philadelphia. Oh, they'd mention it in passing, but then they could move around. Oh, he's from Philadelphia. Boom. Now we'll go on to Hollywood. Nor did they even mention that he had ever worked in the theater. But those are my priorities anyway, and I'm sure sticking to them. So I started searching deeper, and I turned up more and more facts about Herbert Biberman and about his life in Philadelphia and about his career in the theater. And this was big. I realized I had my hands on not just a mere social media post, but an adventure. So, here we go. Herbert Biberman was the oldest of 3 children of Joseph and Emma Biberman. Like so many other Jewish immigrants to Philadelphia in those days, both Joseph and Emma came from families who had fled the pogroms in the Pale of Settlement in the Russian Empire in the late 19th century. Joseph had run away at the age of 16 from the beleaguered shtetl where he had been born, and he fled to the big city of Odessa for a while before coming to America and Philadelphia in the early 1890s. And he brought along with him, eventually, both his parents and his younger brother, Louis. Together, Joseph and Louis had found work in Philly textile mills, and before too long, they had a dressmaking business of their own called Biberman Brothers, and the business began to thrive. Joseph met and married the beautiful Emma Golditch, and they began a family. Herbert arrived first in the year 1900, and then came his sister Rebecca, and then his brother Edward in 1904. Now, by this time, Biberman brothers owned several factories across southeastern Pennsylvania, and eventually they built a factory and dressmaking business in Philadelphia on North 13th Street and Cherry. In the year 1915, the Joseph Bibermans moved to West Upsall Street in the pleasant green rolling hills of the Germantown neighborhood of northwest Philadelphia. His brother Louis and his family moved close by to a big house on Lincoln Drive and Green Street. The Biberman children, especially the two boys, were extremely bright, speeding their way through the lower grades, and they quickly went on to the prestigious public institution called Central High School. Now, the United States had recently entered World War I when Herbert graduated in his high school class in 1917, and although he was voted the position of class prophet and therefore gave a special address at the ceremony predicting all of his classmates' eventual life paths, he had barely made it to the ceremony because he had to come in that day from a local farm out in the countryside where he had been doing volunteer work to help grow crops for the country under the auspices of the School Mobilization Committee. And we should note this first-hand experience with the hard labor of field work, which was to bear fruit, as it were, later in life when he made a famous documentary about workers in the fields and in the mines of the American Southwest called Salt of the Earth. Just as importantly, we can learn from the local papers in 1917 that young Herbert Biberman was also doing amateur theater productions with the Mikveh Israel Association at the Century Club of Philadelphia. Herbert then entered the University of Pennsylvania, where he was soon joined by his younger brother Edward, who had graduated high school when he was only 16. The boys' father wanted them both to join the family business, so they dutifully enrolled at the Wharton School of Business, and both of them graduated at the top of their class, Herbert in 1921 and Edward in 1922. But then, both these boys told their parents that they'd found an artistic calling in life. Edward decided he wanted to be a professional painter, and he went off to the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. Herbert, for his part, had fallen in love with the theater. And this was perhaps inevitable because those were the great years of the influence of Professor Arthur Hobson Quinn at Penn. Quinn, the great curator of American drama. Quinn, who was at the forefront of encouraging research into the great past of Philadelphia theater and encouraging the careers of new playwrights like Eugene O'Neill. As well as doing shows with the undergraduate Mask and Wig Club, Herbert Biberman was easily roped into Quinn's huge historical pageants and projects that he and his associates put on with the Zelosophic Society, such as restaging The Broker of Bogota, an old play from the repertory of the actor Edwin Forrest. Nevertheless, for 2 years after he graduated from Penn, Herbert put in time as vice president in his father's business, but in the evenings, he was sneaking away to the Hedgerow Theater in Moylan to take in what Jasper Dieter was doing there. Certainly, he was also very much attuned to the politics of that Hedgerow company. It is possible that he made his first contacts with others of a, well, let's call it progressive mindset there. In 1924, Herbert informed his father that he was leaving the business and he was leaving America. He needed to tour the great theaters of Europe. So, perhaps with the gentle urging of his wife, Emma, Joseph agreed to fund Herbert's trip, one that would take him to England, France, Germany, and even all the way to Moscow, where he reveled in the experimental and exciting work that Stanislavski, Meyerhold, and others were doing there during the early years of the Soviet Union. When he finally returned to America in the fall of 1925, Herbert immediately enrolled at the brand new Yale School of Drama, joining the very first class to study under the great teacher George Pierce Baker. Herbert returned to Philadelphia in the summer of 1926 to perform at the Broad Street Theater with Anne Harding and the Hedgerow Theater Company in George Bernard Shaw's Captain Brassbound's Conversion and other plays, going back to New Haven for his final year, where the grand new Yale Theater building had just been completed and was dedicated there in December 1926. Herbert Biberman was the leading actor of a play written by a fellow student entitled The Patriarch. Upon receiving his Master's of Art in Theater in 1927, Herbert Biberman, one of the first American acting students ever to get that degree, went right to New York, to the offices of the Theater Guild. The Theater Guild was then the most prestigious producing organization. It was at the forefront of American drama, doing plays by O'Neill, Shaw, Chekhov, and all the exciting young playwrights of the day. When the tall, deep-voiced, and brilliant young man walked into their offices and offered to become a mere assistant stage manager at a paltry salary, well, he was immediately hired, and not in the least because Herbert Biberman spoke German. The Theater Guild had just agreed to produce a translation of Goethe's Faust under the helm of an eminent director they'd imported from the Volksbühne in Berlin. This director spoke no English, so young Herbert immediately became the director's right-hand man, translating everything he said and explaining what needed to be done to all the actors, designers, and stage crew. In fact, the irreplaceable and energetic young man was soon staging the huge crowd scenes and ballets for the work's Walpurgisnacht section and every other scene that required mass movement on stage. He even wrote a stunning article that was published in the New York Times, brilliantly elucidating all the literary history and the performance history of this monumental German work before its first real staging in America. Biberman also acted in the production, as well as acting in other plays for the Theater Guild, such as Carl and Anna, Hotel Universe. And also, he played the leading character in a play about life in the Soviet Union called Red Rust. And it was during the run of that show, Red Rust, that Herbert fell in love with a beautiful young actress who had the female lead, a stunning and accomplished girl from Minneapolis, Minnesota, named Gail Sondergaard. As Herbert and Gail basked in the happiness of new love, the next season Moeller and the Drama Guild turned to Biberman, asking him what he wanted to direct. Immediately he proposed staging the play Roar China by the Russian futurist playwright Sergei Tretyakov, which Biberman had seen produced in Moscow. This play was about the massacre of hundreds of Chinese citizens by the British Navy in the 19th century. But Biberman was insistent that unlike every other production of that play, and indeed unlike Western plays involving Chinese characters, including those done by the Drama Guild, that the roles in Roar China should be played by actual Chinese actors. The great director Reuben Mamoulian, who had done a similar thing using actual black actors in DuBose Hayward's play Porgy for the Guild, wanted to direct Roar China too. But in the end, the Guild made the decision to make Biberman the director over Reuben Mamoulian. And the Guild also agreed to the casting choices, scouring the city's Chinatown neighborhood for likely performers with the help of the Chinese Benevolent and Dramatic Society. The play, which had an enormous cast, was staged at the Martin Beck Theater on Broadway on a set that looked like the deck of a British battleship with huge guns pointing out at the audience. And though it was not a huge financial hit for the Guild, it brought it considerable kudos. Reuben Mamoulian, however, being actually Russian in origin and birth, had been much hurt by not getting that gig, and promptly he resigned from the Theater Guild and left New York. Went and found directing jobs out in Hollywood, leaving the field clear for Biberman. Well, what would Biberman do next? He already had it planned. Through his hedgerow connections, he had become acquainted with the Oklahoma writer Lynn Riggs, and he had read his new play, Green Grows the Lilacs. Biberman would spend the summer of 1930 in the small town of Claremore, Oklahoma, near Tulsa, doing background research on the speech customs and dress of real Oklahoma people. But before heading out to the Southwest, he and Gail made a stop in Philadelphia City Hall, where Biberman's parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, and even his cousins, the kids of Uncle Lewis, who had now retired from the family business, met the young couple and watched them get married by the clerk of the Philadelphia municipal government. By this point in time, Herbert Biberman had developed a definite personal look. He was always wearing a very elegant full suit and perching a pair of pince-nez spectacles on his nose, which made an interesting contrast with his truly broad and brawny body. He was a large man. True, his dark hair was thinning, receding back from the broad dome of his forehead, but that just added to his overall intellectual credibility. Biberman was a bit didactic and opinionated, true. One of the founders of the Theater Guild, Lawrence Langner, recalled later that Biberman seldom talked in less than a shout. As for his directing style, well, some folks, like Langner at the Guild, didn't like it, and frankly considered it dictatorial. His method of directing, according to them, was to show the actors how he would play the part, not to gently guide them to make their own discoveries. And again, according to Langner, who clearly did not like Biberman at all, recalled that, quote, "After seeing a run-through of the play, which he was directing, I remarked, 'These are not actors, they are Bibermans.' And indeed, there was something not quite human about them. They were like robots or homunculi." Still, despite the fact that some in the organization were not fans of his, Herbert Biberman was on the board of the Theater Guild. He was becoming a minor star in the cutting-edge theatrical world of New York, and by then his brother Edward was also living in Manhattan, and together they and Gale hung out with theater folks like Morris Karnofsky, whom he had worked with at the Hedgerow, Catherine Cornell, Paul Robeson, Harold Clurman, Stella Adler. Like many other theater people, both in New York and Philadelphia, Biberman and some of these others were also already attending meetings of anti-fascist and other left-wing political organizations, including the CPUSA, the Communist Party of the United States of America. As the country plunged inexorably into the Great Depression years of the 1930s, this seemed to many like a perfectly natural and understandable thing to do. Clearly, capitalism was failing all around them, and certainly the evident prospect of rising right-wing movements, both at home and elsewhere in the world, required an organized response. But Herbert didn't let his political work get in the way of his budding career. By November, he was rehearsing with the amazing company of Green Grows the Lilacs, including its handsome leading man, Franchot Tone, and by early December, they were bringing the show for a tryout run in Boston. Following a week-long break for Christmas, they assembled again in late December at the Garrick Theater in Biberman's hometown of Philadelphia. It was quite a group in that cast, including the Western singer Tex Ritter, strumming the guitar and singing folk songs. Indeed, it's interesting to note that even before this play was transformed into a musical, it already had lots of song. Even the famous acting teacher Lee Strasberg was in it, playing the role of the peddler that in the eventual musical was renamed Ali Hakim. Richard Hale played the villain in this version called Jeter Fry, not Judd Fry. I suppose the Biberman family and all his old friends from Central High School and the University of Pennsylvania were there in the audience to see the show, but it's unclear to me how close either Herbert or his brother Edward were to the family back in Philly at this point in time. I haven't found any autobiography or memoir by Herbert to fill us in about this period of his life, although Edward, the painter, did write a brief autobiographical sketch that sometimes mentioned his brother much later. Neither of them seemed particularly affectionate or sentimental about Philadelphia that I can see. And indeed, even the local publicity for this show, Green Grows the Lilacs, didn't play up his local roots at all, except for that one brief mention in the Inquirer, the one that caught my eye. His father, Joseph, was the only family member still minding the store at Biberman Brothers, as it were. His dream of turning the business into Biberman and Sons was long gone. And it seems like the cratering national economy and the growing demands of his workers for unionization and increased wages were beginning to take their toll on him. At any rate, the show got full houses in Philadelphia. Audiences cheered wildly for it, as Philly audiences tended to do, and at least one reviewer in Philly, in the Inquirer, clearly enjoyed Green Grow the Lilacs. I'm not sure about the other Philly papers. I haven't had the opportunity to look for them yet, but as far as I can tell, nobody got upset about the scene with the dirty pictures of naked girls in Jeter Fry's shack, as they had up in Boston. Indeed, nobody seemed to get the deeper psychological conflict within Laurie at all about whether she was attracted to Jeter or to Curly. The biggest news that seemed to come out of the Philly run was that on one occasion, a matinee show, the audience suddenly smelled smoke drifting out of the floor of the Garrick Theater in the middle of the first act, and the actress playing Laurie, the diminutive but mighty June Walker, just stepped right out of character, took control of the situation, walked to the edge of the stage, and calmed everyone down. And everyone settled back into their seat, and the show went on. But the play was something. It seemed to have a future, which in those troubled times was not a small thing. Green Grows the Lilacs did go on from Philly to further tryouts in Baltimore and Washington, and then it went to open in New York, where reviewers gave the play and its director smashing reviews. Wrote Brooks Atkinson himself in the New York Times, quote, "As the director of Red Rust and Roar China, Mr. Biberman has already given evidence of his vitality. Here he does it again. He has animated a script that is obviously loquacious. Life drips from every fiber of its narrative." Well, unfortunately, even with notices like that, New York audiences did not rally around like the ones in Philly, Baltimore, and Washington had. Maybe it was the Depression, who knows. Anyway, the show only ran for a couple months. Now, for most of its 12-year-long existence, the Theater Guild had experienced heady days, just going from strength to strength artistically, with huge productions of plays like O'Neill's Morning Becomes Electra and Strange Interlude, bringing them great acclaim. George Bernard Shaw had sent his play St. Joan to them for its world premiere. Alfred Lunt and Lynn Fontanne were regulars in their productions. But remember, there was no such thing as a non-profit organization back then. That part of the U.S. tax code had not been enacted yet, so the Theater Guild had to turn a profit, or at least break even, every year. And this season of 1930-1931, they clearly weren't. Indeed, except for Elizabeth the Queen, a historical drama starring the Lunts. No Theater Guild show that season, especially none of Biberman's, had made money. The Guild was running a deficit of $180,000. Something had to change. A highly contentious board meeting resulted in April of 1931, in which Langner later admitted he did a lot of hysterical shouting, mostly to counter Herbert Biberman's own roaring voice. But by the end of the night, the anti-Biberman faction had won, and he was voted off the board and not offered a new contract to direct any plays for the next season. Herbert's reputation was sufficient enough by this point in time that he convinced one of the old friends of the podcast, Arthur Hammerstein, to back him on his next independent directing project. Do you remember Arthur Hammerstein? He was Oscar Hammerstein's son, who did so much to help with the building of the Philadelphia Opera House on North Broad Street, now the Met. But after his father's death, Arthur Hammerstein, too, had become a Broadway producer, mostly of operettas and other light musicals. But he had just gone bankrupt due to a succession of failed shows and bad real estate investments. But, exactly as his father would have done, Arthur took the opportunity of clearing the decks that a bankruptcy court had given him to plunge immediately into another ambitious new venture. This time, a play by the French author Jean Bart, which was the nom de plume of an American woman who was actually named Maria de Sarlibus, who had written the steamy melodrama at the Walnut Street Theater called The Squall that we learned about in episode 68. Anyway, Jean Bart's new play had one of the most amazing proto-absurdist play titles ever. The Man Who Reclaimed His Head. Imagine that on a marquee. But The Man Who Reclaimed His Head was not an absurdist farce, but yet another turgid melodrama, so popular back in the 1920s and 30s. This play was about an extremely ugly Frenchman, born with a bulbous nose and a scarred face, who somehow had become the leader of the Paris Socialist Party, and he married a beautiful young woman. But when that woman betrayed him with a rival, the ugly Frenchman became obsessed with cutting off the head of her seducer and stealing its good looks for his own. Or something like that. It's really hard to tell exactly from all the summaries of the play and the reviews. Anyway, Herbert Biberman loved this play, thought it had possibilities, and was certain it was the next stepping stone in his inevitable rise back to the top. The show had a lot of crowd scenes, and he was always good at directing crowd scenes after all, and he had planned out astounding scenic effects for it. There were 16 scenes in the show taking place all over the city of Paris, and Biberman wanted to use a stage turntable, a spinning platform, to swiftly move from one scene to another. Now, this turntable would spin, according to Biberman's plan, in the full view of the audience, instead of being obscured between each change by a stage curtain, which had been the usual practice in American theater until then. This is an effect that we in our day might find quite familiar. Anyone who's seen the original production of Les Mis, anyway. But back in 1932, this was innovative, startling. Also, Biberman planned to make innovations in sound design as well, incorporating a device known as the Griffin effectophone, which apparently would transmit sound effects and music directly to the audience as they sat in their seats, seeming to come right from beneath their chairs, actually causing their seats to vibrate sympathetically. It was kind of an early sense-around experience, I guess. Biberman spent 3 months before rehearsals even started perfecting this effectophone with the set designer, Livingston Platt. And somehow, this hot young director had assembled a magnificent cast of actors for his play. People who already had movie careers or soon would become Hollywood A-listers themselves. Claude Rains was going to play the lead, along with Jean Arthur as his wife. Ernest Glendenning was going to play the nemesis, doomed to lose his head during the action, and there were about 50 other people in the cast overall. Arthur Hammerstein and Herbert Biberman brought this production to the Garrick Theater in Philadelphia in mid-June of 1932. It was an odd time for a tryout run, but evidently their plan was to try the play out ahead of time in late summer when theater rental rates were the cheapest, and then take the whole company with him to do a summer season of various other small plays in a summer stock company in White Plains, New York, and then revive The Man Who Reclaimed His Head in September at the very beginning of the fall Broadway season and get a jump on everybody else. It could work. It had to work. Anyway, this wild venture first rolled into Philly in mid-June, just as the theater season was ending and the political season was really taking shape. This was the year when FDR would be elected president, right? The Republican Party was having their convention out in Chicago that very same week. They renominated Herbert Hoover, to no one's surprise, and the news of the Republican National Convention was printed in the Philly papers right alongside the reviews of the world premiere of The Man Who Reclaimed His Head. Neither of these projects, it seemed, was really going well. Though Philly reviewers did seem to like Claude Rains' acting, they were just startled and confused by the ambitious mess that they saw before them on the stage of the Garrick. At some point, somebody running the show must have had reservations, but either nobody was brave enough to pull the plug, or else Biberman just shouted them down, and it plunged ahead. He and Claude Rains and Jean Arthur went off to Westchester County, and then, by late August, early September, the company was reassembled to finally take their show to Broadway, opening at the Broadhurst Theater, where, just like Herbert Hoover, they got panned by reviewers and abandoned by the public. The show closed in 3 weeks. Herbert J. Biberman's Broadway directing career was effectively over. Nobody wanted to give him any more shows. He tried working in radio dramas for a while. That didn't work out. He went back to the Westchester County Drama Festival in White Plains the following summer, intending to direct a season of innovative new plays, get a new start. But quickly he learned that summer audiences didn't want to be challenged. They wanted to see sweet old favorites to relax during the summertime. Herbert tried his usual method of arguing and shouting everyone down, but it didn't work. He was fired after 2 weeks. As far as I can tell, Herbert J. Biberman never directed a play again. And then came one final, shocking blow. Down in Philadelphia, on August 2nd, 1933, his father, the successful and dynamic immigrant businessman from Odessa, Joseph Biberman, walked into the garage behind his house at 607 West Upsall Street, put a gun to his head, and pulled the trigger. Nothing that I can tell from the brief articles in the paper about Joseph Biberman's suicide tell anything about what led to his final act of despair and self-violence. All I can say is that Joseph Biberman was not alone among successful, self-made American businessmen in the deepest years of the Great Depression. Suicide was an all-too-common solution to their problem. As often happens, the other family members in the victim's family internalized the trauma. It affected their own health and well-being. Joseph's son-in-law, the husband of Herbert and Edward Biberman's sister, Rebecca, a man named Benjamin Laskin, found the body of Joseph in the garage that day. Benjamin would later die of a heart attack at just the age of 42. Joseph's younger brother, Louis Biberman, who had come along with him from the old country and had built the business together with him, never recovered from the shock of losing Joseph. And he would die just a few months later, in late 1933, at the age of 54. The Philadelphia firm of Biberman Brothers was no more. Its remaining factories were sold to sharp-eyed opportunists from the New York garment business. The buildings where once Biberman Brothers had turned out clothes in central Philadelphia, well, they're now gone too. They've been wiped away to clear ground for the enormous bulk of the convention center north of Market Street. In the papers back in 1933, it was noted that Joseph Biberman had left careful bequests before he shot himself, declaring he would give $10,000 each to his 3 children and his wife, as well as various smaller bequests to various Jewish charities. Now, none of these was great amount even then, but it wasn't even really clear if his estate actually had the money to cover the terms of his will. So, that's pretty much the end. And I don't really have a good ending to this story, I'm afraid. Because from this point on, the story leaves both the world of theater and also Philadelphia. The next item I can find in the newspapers about Herbert Biberman is that he'd signed an agreement with Columbia Pictures in Hollywood, joining their production staff to write screenplays and direct films. Gail Sondergaard went with him. She became an Oscar-winning movie star. His brother Edward moved to L.A. as well and lived there the rest of his life. Their mother Ava also left Philadelphia and joined her 2 sons in Southern California. She died there in 1949. Herbert, besides becoming a prominent screenwriter and director in Hollywood, became a leader in the union movement, continued his political activities supporting civil rights causes, labor causes, anti-fascism organizations. He was an ardent member of the CPUSA, as many of his accusers would later point out. He was a staunch defender of Stalin and the Soviet Union, right up until, of course, the Soviet-Nazi Pact was signed in 1939, which threw Herbert for a loop for a while, as it did a lot of other communist supporters in the United States. But, all of that falls under the category of Hollywood history. And, hey, it's pretty easy to find. If you Google Herbert J. Biberman, Bieberman, all that stuff easy to find online. And, of course, there's that Jeff Goldblum movie. If you want a really deep and detailed version, I recommend highly that you read the 2003 book called The Inquisition in Hollywood, Politics and the Film Community, 1930 to 1960, by Larry Chepler and Stephen Englund. It's fantastic. Herbert Biberman and all he went through during the blacklist era of the late 40s and the 1950s is really well covered in it. All I can say is nobody ever really seems to have explored either the early theater career or the Philadelphia story, as it were, of Herbert J. Biberman, one of the Hollywood 10. And perhaps it was because he wanted it that way. His final associations with the city were too traumatic to ever really want to go back there. As a young man, he left the city of brotherly love with perhaps the brightest prospects of any person I've ever studied in all my years of working on this topic. And in the long run, it all came crashing down. I'm Peter Schmitz, and our podcast theme music is by Christopher Mark Colucci. Additional underscoring and music courtesy of Epidemic Sound. I'll be back next time with another Hollywood story, this one about Diana Barrymore, the daughter of John Barrymore, the actress who had too much too soon. Thank you for coming along with us on another adventure in theater history, Philadelphia.